You should let the computers do the things that they're really good at, just repetitive, dull, boring, dirty, dangerous tasks. But focus on building your empathy, focus on building your interpersonal skills, the ability to win friends and influence people, if you will, and you will be better off, and AI will never be able to replace you.
Welcome to The Power of Construction, a Procore podcast highlighting the industry leaders who are evolving their businesses today to create a better future tomorrow. I am Sasha Reed.
And I'm Chris Langiza.
And we will be your hosts for this conversation today. I want to remind everyone, the last episode, which actually was our first inaugural episode, we touched on a troubling reality, really focusing on the productivity gap within construction. And I think one of the things that we discovered in that conversation was that it's less a symptom and it's more systematic. So what we're viewing is this really is a sign that our industry is leveraging outdated business models in order to operate. And the idea of technology and workforce as something we need to invest in is not a nice to have, but it's absolutely a need to have. And if we're really looking at increasing profit margins, the investment within those people is really the place where we're going to find that. So today we're going to be diving a little bit deeper and asking the question, are old school leadership styles holding the industry back? I know that can be a very touchy question to ask, but I think it's worth a conversation. According to research from KPMG, the average profit margin in the construction industry typically ranges between 2 to 5%. And this was about 2022. And according to a report by McKinsey & Company, a low profit margins predicament in construction often leads to underinvestment in workforce development and training. And the report highlights that construction companies frequently cut back on these investments, especially during the lean times. Another McKinsey report that I wanted to bring up was that only 20% of construction companies consistently invest in that workforce development and training. And I want to make sure that we state the obvious here, that this is due to economic constraints and some of those low margins that we speak to. But what unfortunately is the outcome of that is this persistent skills gap, and it really limits the ability of our industry to evolve and modernize. Finally, the McKinsey Global Institute reported that the construction sector has seen only a 1% annual increase in productivity and productivity growth over the past 20 years. And that is partly due to this investment challenge that we spoke to. And we're seeing other industries outgrow us. For instance, manufacturing has seen productivity growth of 3 to 4% annually, and most of that is driven by this continual investment. So I think one of the things that we really want to talk about today is this reality that razor thin margins is the reality for most businesses within construction. And typically, we've really looked at labor and material costs of being the place where we can eke out some of that profit. But what we're seeing in these conversations we're having with more and more leaders whose companies are growing and are growing rapidly is that is not the place where they're able to eke out that investment due to economic conditions, the labor shortage. Frankly, the cost of money is more expensive than ever, but so are the cost of those mistakes. And so we're seeing some of these leaders who are growing their company looking at how they're doubling down on that workforce development training. And that is leading to better operational effectiveness. And I think that's really what we want to hold on to today. And then the second piece of this is the idea of that next generation. So that investment in workforce really is the investment in your future leaders within your organization. And so what we hope to talk about today is how leaders today that have the seasoned experience can pass the baton to these younger leaders who have ideas, passion, as well as different level of experience working in this modern world, and really capture the lessons of the existing generation that's handing the baton to the new generation in order to operate our businesses more effectively. It's a big ask, but we have an organization that we're going to be focusing on today in order to help us talk through this from a practical standpoint, having done this already. We're going to be highlighting an organization that is doing this today, that is experiencing that high growth, that is investing in their workforce. And we're going to spotlight Performance Contracting, or PCI. And I want to tell you a little bit about them. They're one of the largest specialty contractors in the United States. Since 2015, they have grown from a $1 billion organization to $3 billion in revenue. And they attribute their growth to 4 key factors: investing in and betting on talent, developing a robust leadership strategy, fostering an owner mindset, and leveraging mentorship and accountability as their levers for operational effectiveness. And all of those things pulled together, there really is a 5th element that I think is unstated, but I wanted to call out here, and that is their organization and their leadership's willingness to pass the torch to the next generation. And what that has done, it's created opportunities for leaders who are sitting in the wings, waiting for those opportunities. And it also is ensuring that the business is getting those fresh ideas and that new experience to help the company flourish. So I'm excited today to have our guest from PCI, Mel Renfrow. She is the VP of Strategic Development and Marketing at PCI. She has over 25 years of experience with PCI. She is the most senior leader in their people and leadership development space. And she leads a team of 40 plus professionals who manage employee, organizational, and leadership development activities for both field and salary workers. So Mel, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, one of the things that clearly my introduction of PCI hopefully set the stage a little bit for our conversation, but my introduction of you was very brief. So I'd love if we could start off with you giving us a little more information about the work that you're doing within your role at PCI. And if we can start right up front, I don't want to bury the lead, that growth from 1 billion to 3 billion, what was some of the narrative, the story behind that growth?
Yeah, so I am over strategic development, which you said. So we have a really robust learning program. We start with leading self, and then it goes into leading others, leading leaders, and then leading the organization. And so we started originally as part of Owens Corning, and we spun off from that with about 300 people. And then you mentioned our numbers. So I think what has been really instrumental is we develop everybody. We see everybody as a leader, and we're not developing specifically one for one. So, hey, we know that this person's going to be retiring, so let's name his successor and just put all of our eggs in that one basket. Instead, it's let's invest in everyone, and then when spots become available, we're ready to go. So I think just looking at it a little bit differently as how do we put the fundamentals in place? And since we are nationwide, we have about 45 different locations. It's really about consistency. How do you make sure people are learning the same things without being too paperwork heavy and, getting down into that? But how do you put some fundamentals in place that you can pick up and transfer? And then defining, we have what is the X factor? Because I think everybody, no matter what field you're in, you can spot the people that have it. So we've spent time on trying to define what is it. And then you mentioned how do you perpetuate that? So it is not always, it's self-funding, self-reliant, and all of those good things. Because like you mentioned, not all of the investment can be financial, right? So how do you get people to buy into it, and how do you get people to own not only their progression, but how do you make it more holistic? So I care about you, you care about me, and your growth is my growth as well. So it sounds kind of corny and it sounds pretty warm and fuzzy, especially for a construction company. And so I think what we've had to do, and you talked about the old mindset versus the new mindset, is how do you get people to look beyond this is how we've always done it and how we're going to continue to do it, and be open to doing things a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the, investing in everyone as a future leader, right? And really trying to find those who, or identifying it first and then trying to figure out the ones who really have it. Because I think so often when we talk about leadership development inside of companies, people are focused on a small group, right? They're like, oh, these are the people that we've decided are going to be our future leaders. And I think sometimes people surprise you and they come from everywhere. And that's where a lot of great new ideas come from, and people that are willing to challenge kind of the status quo of, hey, this is the way we've always done it. Sometimes they're coming from a place you weren't expecting it.
And to be fair, that is where we started originally with leadership development. It was about 2010, I believe. And it was a solution. So we are, like I said, a spinoff from Owens Corning. And so those original investors, when they got ready to retire, how are we going to replace them? And that's where it started at that highest level. And it was exactly what you're saying. Let's look out at the field. Who are the high potentials and how do we focus the training there? You have to start somewhere. And so in the last, since 2010, that's what we've been doing, is just keep going further, deeper into the organization. So it's not perfect at all. And we still do track the high potentials, or, we name them. But what we have found, and everybody is guilty of it, even myself, you tend to hire yourself.
Yes, so true. Mm-hmm.
You tend to value people that have the same sense of humor, all of the things, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a team of, everybody wears a bow tie, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, this year what we need is somebody, that's wild and crazy and wears their shirt untucked. You better have somebody on your team that wears their shirt untucked. And so that's what we've really been trying to focus on. It's not just about training, it starts in recruiting, truly. And we've even gone out of the construction industry instead of always focusing on people that have construction, science, or management backgrounds. How do you get people that are just really good thinkers and fit into the culture that we have? And then they can learn the construction side of things. So it's a balance where we try to pair them up with people that have more of that expertise in the construction.
Well, in an industry where we're struggling to find skilled people to come into the industry that want to be here, I think looking outside and looking for those creative thinkers, those problem solvers, those that, can handle a lot of tasks at the same time, that have an interest, let's give them a shot, because I think they're going to work out pretty nicely.
Yeah. And then the next thing that happens, then you can create your own problem, because if you have a team where everyone is different, how do you keep them from killing one another? Right?
Yes.
And so then that's, as the leader, it becomes more of, how do you balance it? So first of all, identify what are the different types of thinkers, talent, background that you need to create a highly functioning team that's balanced. So that's step one. Identify what those skills are and behaviors are, and then build around that. And then how do you keep everything balanced?
And one of the things I think it's the unintended consequences. We have these great ideas. So we've recognized and understand that hiring to similarity doesn't give you the natural conflict that comes with individuals who just think differently or have different experiences. Then the unintended consequences of that is then how do you get everybody singing off the same song sheet, or rowing in the same direction? And for PCI, one of the things that in doing our research was so interesting to me was this recognition that as we grow as a company and as we have offices spread across the country, there needs to be some way of unifying this effort. And I would love if you could tell us about the initiative of One PCG, how that came about, and really how this, through the lens of operation, created the pathway for consistency and additionally even talent retention eventually. Tell us about the one PCG motion.
Yeah. Well, I'll start off because we've been saying performance contracting. We've said PCI, PCG. Do we have multiple personalities? No, I don't either. No, so Performance Contracting Group, PCG, that's the parent company, and PCI is one of the companies. So they're all of our specialty contracting services. So that's why we keep flopping back and forth. So what one PCG did, I guess I'll start with our purpose statement, is to preserve our company, to perpetuate and share the wealth. And wealth, yes, that can be literal wealth, but it's also wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, wealth of everything, all of the above, right? So we really ingrain that in people. And what one PCG did is to look at all those systems. And the way we were designed originally, we have these different business units, and they all have their own business plans. They all have their own P&L, right? And so estimators have their quotas that they need to reach. And so historically, we would have multiple offices in the same city. I'll use Seattle, for example. And they all operated in their own silos. It was very micro.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to hit my plan? Is our branch going to be successful? And it took people at the beginning of all of this to have a more macro view of it. And so, hey, if we partnered up, that makes sense. And you talked about margins, like it's appealing to owners, it's appealing to general contractors because, hey, it's one contract, it's reduced risk.
Okay.
And so how do we get together and bundle our services to be more attractive to clients? And in doing so, you reduce, like we would be on job sites, literally 2 job trailers, 2 administrators out there entering time or whatever it might be, 2 superintendents sitting in a weekly meeting. How are we smarter about it? And so what one PCG has done is really looking at all of the services, that we provide, the different product lines, and just being really more strategic about, hey, I'm bidding this work, and well, I'm just we just perform these product lines. We don't do scaffolding. I know this other branch does scaffolding. So, hey, do you want to take a look at this? And that, in essence, is a very brief, kind of example of what one PCG is. But we were just really positioned. We had people that were ready to go, and maybe they were blocked because the person that was had more seniority was the same age, and there's only one position at the top. But they're ready to go, and guess what? Now we have this huge project in Memphis. Hey, do you want to go run that new project? And so it has made us think differently. You don't just have to stay at your location. How can we be more smart about diversifying our work and our talent and just leveraging the footprint that we have as an organization? So it's just really that macro perspective. And additionally, the training that we've done has developed these relationships that people have formed that precede those phone calls. Hey, we've got this opportunity over here. You want to come and join us?
And I love that, because what you're affording to your labor, your people that work inside of the organization, is this mobility and growth, right? This opportunity for them to, hey, I want to move. I want to move up, but it might not be here, and I'm willing to go other places. And so that's very motivating to a lot of folks. So I'm sure that really plays a big role in how you retain some of those top people inside of your organization as well.
Yeah, and it just provides, when you have a really large project, and if you're just pulling from one branch, well, they still have business to run over here. They still have, clients that they need to serve. So how can you grow and still maintain you know, smooth sailing at home. Well, if you're taking people from multiple locations, we've had projects that have pulled people in that have been in the East, and they've had people from Portland and from the Bay Area and from Indianapolis and pulling in people from all different places to build kind of this Uber super team, right? And then that also helps identify the talent too. Like, hey, who showed up on that as a junior that really did a great job, and what's opportunities? And that's how a lot of our organic growth has happened, honestly, is we've pursued work in new areas and then just established ourselves and started looking around like, what other opportunities are there here? So we've done that quite a bit.
And one of the challenges that comes with that growth is finding the labor, right, for the organization. How are you all thinking about that a little bit differently? I mean, obviously, you're bringing people from different branches, but I'm sure there's a lot about you still need to grow the number of people that you have.
Yeah. Well, it's still, we can pull in craft labor, right? So superintendents and general foremen, like at the highest levels. But when you're looking at like, hey, how do we actually man the project? That's where we really establish our reputation. We're a union company. So our relationship that we have with the UBC and some other, our unions and the locals. So it's using those relationships where we can call on others and basically man the projects.
And so you talked a lot about leadership. You talked about how you're growing those people. You're bringing different perspectives together. One of the things that we've commonly seen, holding the industry back is this old school mindset. How are you seeing that that's either being removed inside of your organization, or how are you seeing it's maybe holding others back that you're competing against? Because it's really contributing to the productivity gap because people are just doing it the way they always have been.
I have a good story about it. You want to hear?
We love great stories.
It's an example. So in 2008, we started what we call our field leadership development track. And so at the time, like I said, we're predominantly union. At the time, some people were like, why do we want to invest time and resources and money and training a workforce that can pick up and take all of those skills, talent, learning, and go work for our competitor and make them more money, right? And so thankfully, there were people in the room that said, well, what if they didn't? And really believed that, hey, I think that if we invest in them in the way that nobody else is, none of our competitors are doing beyond the apprentice and the training they're getting through the union, but actually going into leadership skills. And if we invest in them, we're going to take a gamble that they'll invest in us. And that will be the thing that gives us the competitive edge. And did some people leave? Of course they did. But this is where it gets really aspirational. Okay, so now they leave and now they've made the construction industry as a whole better. And so really thankful. That was pretty revolutionary in 2008 to essentially invest in something that people could have put in their toolbox and just literally gone to a different company and worked for. But it paid off. It has paid off. So since 2008, we have been training. We have it Foreman 100 through 700, I believe now. And even where we start looking, earlier than that at the people that are displaying these behaviors that we have found within our company leads to success and leads to being able to lead people through influence instead of position and getting them into kind of an emerging program. So that's something that we did that was not all leadership was happy with, and not a lot of people, not everyone bought into, but once it started to work in one location, and then, the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and it just kind of snowballed. So that's one example of how, kind of that old school versus, doing something a little bit differently.
So when this initiative came up, was it some of the newer leaders that were trying to push it forward, and maybe some long-standing leaders with old school mindsets that were holding it back, or did you find that there were supporters that kind of came from places you didn't expect?
Yes. I mean, all of the
The
above,
above.
right? I think part of it, there are a lot of things that kind of go in when you look back in hindsight of what made something successful. Um, I think it really just comes down to people that were more risk adverse versus people that are kind of willing to bet on themselves.
Mm.
Our one of our former president and CEOs, he himself came up through the trades, Bill Massey. So I think part of it was like, hey, I know if personally, I know if somebody would have bet on me, it would have made all the difference to me. Well, someone did bet on him, right? And so I think it was his way of kind of paying it forward, and he was very passionate about it, and a lot of other people saw it the same way. So I think it really helps when you have somebody that's passionate about it in a position of influence, and then also when you start doing something to nurture it and make sure that it grows and it takes root, because we have a lot of ideas, not just in development. We all have a lot of ideas, right, in how we run the business. And so I think it's just being, what are you going to invest time in and, make happen yourself? And are you going to dig in and help? And whether that's this, which is a big initiative, to, support field training, or if it's, hey, I think this person that reports to me has a lot of potential. I'm now invested in that. Yeah, you can send them off to class or whatever. That's only part of it.
Yep.
It's the smallest part of it, actually, the classroom training. It's when you get back and it's actually, what did you learn? And what are your goals? So then whenever you start hitting it out of bounds on that thing that you're working on, that I can call you out on it and we can talk about it, right? And just making sure that it's coming from a place of, I want you to grow. I want you to be better.
Yeah, I mean, all this talk of investing in people so that you can make your team better, but also could make the industry better, reminds me of a meme. I think it's what happens if we train them and they leave, but more importantly, what happens if we don't and they stay?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not just about making them better for the org, but it's like we have an obligation to train these folks to make sure that they can perform for our business in the way that we're asking them for. And that goes where those goals and those rules come in so critically for you. Now, you all partnered with FMI to develop a lot of this strategy. Can you tell me a little bit about how that partnership evolved and how they helped you build that leadership development program?
Yeah, so that started in 2010, when I talked earlier about where we had that first set of C-suite leaving, and we went to, it was the Field Leadership Institute. And so that was really the first development we had at all that we went outside of the company for. And so they conduct 360 reviews. They've quite the process there. And I think it was the first time people had been in roles that they actually got feedback that people were very direct with, but respectful. And if you are getting results, you're going to think you're successful. But I think what it helped them realize is, I'm getting the results, but at what cost? And how could I be even better if I weren't like creating this, riptide for myself? And so I think that's feedback was the huge turning point. And this shift of, hey, a work relationship is transactional. I'm going to give you a job for which I'll give you money. And your part of it is you're going to show up here and you're going to work from this time to this time and then go home. And then neither of us exist out of the hours. And that's just not really how it works, because you own it both ways. And so how do you have to get to know your people, right? Beyond just a transactional relationship.
Well, and that's what allows you in many cases not just to give feedback, because I think, construction's full of criticism and feedback, but is it always constructive?
Right.
And I think that's when people open up to actually listening to the feedback, is when they know, like, hey, I know you, right? We go grab beers after work, like we go cycling on the weekends, whatever it is. Like, I know this is coming from a good place. So you want me to be better? Or in the PCI case, like, hey, we're all shareholders in this company as employee owned. Like, so, hey, how do we go ahead and invest in that too? Because we're going to self-police a little bit here as well.
Well, what it comes down to is trust.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're telling me something that I need to do better, first thing is, why is Chris telling me this? Is there something for him to gain? Or so if I trust that you truly are giving it from a selfless perspective, or maybe selfish in the way, because then it'll make us all better and profits will be bigger and all of that. It just comes down to trust. Why is this person saying what they're saying, and should I believe them and do something about it?
I'd love to get into the mechanics of this a little bit, because I think conceptually makes a lot of sense. I've actually spoken to one of your senior leaders who had that 360 feedback early to mid career. And he shared with me how much of a pivotal moment that was, how hard it was to hear some of that feedback, but how it jarred him kind of out of a place where he actually was in a division and in a position and in a project that maybe wasn't the best use of his skill set, but it caused that self-reflection that then put him on a path of being a better leader, choosing a market that aligned to his skill sets, and I guess got him unstuck, and in the process created a better working environment and elevated his leadership skills. So I'd love to get a little bit more into the tactics. And I know that you have a Center for Leadership and Development. You invest in some subsidies for your workforce. Tell us a little bit about the mechanics of how you're actually reskilling this workforce within the organization.
Yeah. So FMI we still go to, by the way, but we've just gone deeper into the organization with that. So I guess what I'd say is we look at that Center for Learning and Development. It's awesome. It's in Lenexa, Kansas, where our headquarters are. And I say the vision for that building is to connect, develop, and inspire. That's what we're supposed to do. The connection piece is so key. I think that's really at the heart of it, what has made us successful. And it's because we bring people in. Hey, during COVID, everything shut down. We're doing a lot of virtual training. And then the question becomes, obviously, it's much more fiscally, better for us. Are we going to keep on that path? Or do we continue to invest money in actually physically bringing people in? And it was a no-brainer for us. And the reason why is because the way we set it up, I'll give you an example. We have a project engineer boot camp, and it's for people usually within a year of joining the organization. They come back. We keep it a small class. We divide them up into teams of 6. People in construction are super competitive. I don't know if you know this. It's week long. And so there's different activities, and it kind of builds up to this final project that they have. But what that does, then those people that went to that class then come back. We have something called Trek, which is like our new we call it's for new owners. It's after people have been there for a year. So then they run into each other at this training, right? So now it's 2 years. What that does is it builds a relationship for that peer-to-peer learning. So we have the same job, but we're not in the same location. You don't know my boss. I don't know your boss. I don't work for them. And so it's somebody that you can call up like, hey, have you had to deal with this before? What did you do? Or, hey, we have a project for the very first time. I'm having to, meet these regulations. Have you ever done it before? Can you give me a heads up on where can I find those things? So it's not just a top-down training model. It's peer-to-peer as well. So that's been really key to that. And I forgot the second part of your question. I'm sorry, Sasha.
It's all right. I'll actually call it out for you. So you have 186 individuals that are going through the training and development seminars. You've had 3,000 employees who've participated in this. You're employing 8 external coaches that particularly are dedicated to your younger leaders, and you subsidize some of the new recruits' first year with a total of about $3 million spent each year in that workforce subsidy. And the reason why I think that the nuts and bolts of the numbers matter is I want to show what that kind of scale of investing looks like in order to give leaders a good sense of, well, what does this actually mean when I'm looking at my P&L chart? But I think one of the reasons why this is very successful for you and potentially could be a competitive advantage is because you are an ESOP, so you're employee owned. And that creates an environment and a structure in which I think you can take more risks and really use risk taking as a growth strategy. So that's kind of what I want to pivot on now, looking at the nature of the organization. How have you unlocked organizational transformation through this idea of investing in your people, setting standard operating procedures for your operations group, and the combination with tech? How has that risk taking factor really been a key to growth for you?
So, right, that's what starts there. How do we get people in the door? And then the second challenge is how do you keep them? And that is where making sure that everybody is getting the same training. So what we would see, we have different size offices with different markets, all of those things. So what we would see is somebody that would, for example, be in a really, really large branch, they had a hyper-specific task that they were doing over and over and over again, where somebody that was in a different branch that maybe was smaller, they were given entire projects to run from, when they started until they finished. And so when you're looking at that, is you have somebody that has this huge breadth versus somebody that has a very deep well of knowledge. So how do you level the playing field? And that's where we came back and we're actually looking at, to be successful, not only what do you need to know task-wise, but what are the experiences that you need to have? And being more intentional about it instead of it just being fate and organic, we're actually looking at like, hey, what kind of projects do you need to run? Or what exposure do you need to different types of product lines or things like that? And helping orchestrate that, being a little bit of a Chuck Woolery on Love Connection, and how do you help people out? So it's like, first identify what are those experiences that people need to have in order to be, have good discernment and make good decisions and have street cred, as we like to call it, and then how do you then orchestrate that for them so they can have those experiences?
And one of the things that we had talked about was, as an ESOP or employee-owned organization, there's a bit of a competitive advantage for you just in the makeup of how the company is structured. So when you think about that, how does that structure of the organization feed that competitive advantage for you as a business?
It's kind of a blessing and a curse, to be honest. And I mean curse, but in a good curse kind of a way. So what it does, I've worked at other companies. I worked for Hyatt Hotels. And so I can say the difference is when you are employee owned, and therefore I know what your job is for the most part. Now, this goes for not necessarily at our corporate office because we have very specialized positions there, but in the branches, if you're a project engineer and I'm a project engineer, I know what good looks like. So I know when you're slacking, or I know when maybe you're not utilizing a certain tool that would make your job a lot easier. And so I'm going to help you out because ultimately, if you get better, then we'll make more money and I'll make more money. And it's also all about reputation. And so if you're showing up and you're not representing the company well, it's in my best interest to let you know that doesn't really fly. And so it's not a top down, it's not just a manager's problem. If somebody isn't producing quality work, or maybe if they're not showing up and representing the company the right way, it at the peer level, even, it will self-police. But then that also goes into the training part of it too. Because if you're doing something that's taking 5 hours, and even though I'm not a trainer, I have something that can help you get it done in 2 hours, I'm going to help you out. And so that's where it's been great, where it's just self-perpetuating. And again, it goes back to that purpose, protect and grow the company.
And I think, if you think about it as an owner of a company, you want to do everything you can to make sure that the company is successful, right?
Mhm.
Because you have a share of that. And so the more you are able to help the person next to you, right? Or to be able to come up with a new idea or a new strategy to maybe potentially grow that business, I think people have that more of a sense of ownership when it comes to that, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think traditionally, I came from a family run construction company. I think a lot of times when it's just about a few individuals, it can be frustrating. And no matter how hard I work, there's a block there, where I think you just think of things differently. If you create something and you have to sign your name at the bottom of it, you put a little more intention and care into it. And I think that's what it has done. And also, we really it goes into rewarding. What behaviors do you recognize and reward as an organization, whether implicit or not? And we reward those that help others. And we always say, if you want to be promoted, well, then you need to train your replacement. And that's how you just show up and be the best version, and there'll be a place for you. And I truly believe that. And I know it can be frustrating. We also have a balance. If you've put I can hear people asking the question, hey, what if you've spent all this money on someone and they're in a program and then they finish it and there's nowhere to go? Can that be less productive? Of course it can. But in any of these things that we do, nobody is guaranteed anything. So that's key too. If you're sending someone to a program, it's not necessarily, hey, you're going to this because you are the next whatever. It's more, hey, we want you to be ready when an opportunity presents itself. But things change all the time, especially in construction with, expansion, retraction, and all of that. So the key is we want you to be ready to go when an opportunity presents itself. And that's where the focus is. And also, any development you do, it's not just about work. It makes you better as a person. You mentioned our senior leader that went away and got this 360 feedback and realized, like, oh, wait a second. That impacted his life too. I'm sure his spouse and his kids were probably like, here's a thank you note. So it's really on the individual too. How do you just want to be the best version of yourself that you can be?
Yeah. It's interesting. I want to go back to a couple of things you said, just how people show up. And, Procore, we call that living the values, right? It's like, how do we embody the values of the company? And for you, it's training and teaching and developing other people is critical to that. And I think that's so incredibly important. And, that just allows people to know that, like, you're investing in me. I'm going to invest in others. And while there's no guarantee, I know I'm going to be ready for the call when it comes. And that's pretty empowering because, like you said, there will be times of rapid expansion and those opportunities are going to present themselves. And I think the more prepared people feel when those calls come, I think the better they're going to perform and the more loyal that they're going to be as well.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing, you mentioned the coaches that we have. We have both internal and external coaches that we utilize. It's actually much more than 8 now, or 8 people that are getting coaching. Those are official. You have an official coach that does this, but we actually have an exponential amount of coaches within the organization. And I think my advice to people would be, if you're sitting around and waiting for somebody to grab your hand and lead you to, hey, here's the path for you to grow your career to whatever you want that to look like, you might be waiting for a while. And so how do you recognize somebody? And by the way, it can be somebody you don't like. But you recognize they're doing something that is being rewarded. How do I figure out what that is? And I would say, talk to them and figure it out, because there's a skill that they have there, and build that relationship with them to get feedback back and forth.
Love that. So before we wrap up,
Yeah.
let's think big for a moment. As we evolve the leadership skills in the construction industry, and we're really trying to tap in kind of the full potential of employees, what do you think the future of our industry looks like as we start to unlock that?
So I think there's a lot of talk of artificial intelligence, right? And so it's going to continue to grow. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like in our industry, but we're already seeing effects of that. The one thing that we won't be able to replicate is, being human and that interaction that happens. And so it's all of those EQ, whatever you want to call it, that is going to become more and more important. I've already seen it in my 25 years. Like the focus, operational excellence that's the stakes for getting into the game. Being really good at your job and all the tasks, and that's starting point. And as AI takes over more of these tasks and things that can be replicated over and over, for people that want to make a difference, you better get really, really good at all of those interpersonal skills that are needed that can't be replicated by computers. And so we do something called a leader readiness evaluation. It's all these different skill sets and behaviors, and people rate them on it. And when I'm reviewing it with people, operational excellence is one of the highest that shows up consistently over and over, and people are proud of it and they should be proud of it. But what I say to them, I'm like, every single person I go over this with is good at that. So you and everybody else. So what's your ace? What are one of these other things that you have that is going to set you apart? And most of the times it's interpersonal effectiveness. And that can even be something you think of like really good at strategy or whatever that might be. There's still an interpersonal component of that, because you can have great strategy, but when you explain it to other people, it can be like that it's your way or the highway when it comes to that strategy, instead of inspiring people, and this is why, and wouldn't it be great? And I talked about that CEO that was so passionate about if we invest in them, they'll invest in us. That's what you need to get really good at. And construction, it used to be like, hey, we don't talk about our feelings. But we
Really?
need
What job site did you work at?
We just shout them.
Yeah, but we need to, and I think we've gotten so much better, and we have a lot of companies across the country, mental health awareness, and it's a real thing in the construction industry. And so we need to get better. We need to be better at the human stuff is what I would say. And I think that's where things will go into the future.
I was speaking with an AI expert at an event down in Australia, and he said the one thing that computers are not good at is empathy. And so you should let the computers do the things that they're really good at, just repetitive, dull, boring, dirty, dangerous tasks. But focus on building your empathy, focus on building your interpersonal skills, the ability to win friends and influence people, if you will, and you will be better off, and AI will never be able to replace you.
Yeah. And for those, I know there's somebody out there listening well, they're working on building an empathy. Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
They are.
They'll probably be as about empathetic as I am. So that's fine. We'll be good. We'll be good.
Chris. The Chris 3000.
The Chris 3000.
Well, Mel, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of these insights. We were very impressed at looking at PCI's growth over time. But once we started asking questions around the how you're growing was really when we were like, we need to have them on the podcast, because what you're doing is, and you've been doing, what we're trying to help so many leaders see the value of, which is that investment. And so I would love to share just some of what I heard today and what I learned today. First, unlocking growth at scale requires mindsets to evolve and leadership skills to be redefined. And having you here, this is your remit. This is what you're doing for the organization is just so powerful. An individual leader dedicated to making sure that that's a piece of the business. Risk taking is a growth strategy when you invest in more than just technology. So one of the things that you talked about was, what if we train these individuals and they go off into the industry? It's a win-win. If they go off into the industry's better, which means your partners are better. True, it means some of your competitors may also be better. But if they stay and they grow with you because you invested in them, it means you're harnessing that fresh, trained talent to make your company grow and be more successful.
The other part of it is how you get them to stay instead of going. Goes back to those human elements. It's how they're being treated. Are they being valued? Do they feel like they're seen and heard? And that's what it basically boils down to.
And that was exactly my final takeaway, which was operational efficiency is more than about the standardization of the business process. It's these culture, the way of behaving, the way of interacting with each other, which essentially creates this great retention tool. So I'm glad that you could come on and talk through the nuts and bolts of this, because I wanted to make sure this wasn't just seen as some ethereal idea, but there are real investments that can be made in that workforce. So Mel, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah. And Mel, we always ask all of our guests at the end a few questions, rapid fire.
Oh God. Okay.
Shouldn't be any curveballs here. So the first one is, what book are you currently reading or listening to that you would recommend to others?
I have a deep, dark secret. Even in the job that I do, I'm actually more of a fiction reader than like leadership. So I'm not reading one right now, but I will tell you the one that made the biggest impact on me that I recommend the most is the old OG standard Good to Great by Jim Collins. Everybody says it because it's really, really good. But in case I know you don't want the fiction, but I'm going to tell.
Interesting. I'd love to hear your fiction too, because we've had some other guests that have brought up that they're big fiction readers and that it gives them an outside perspective sometimes, or a creative perspective. So would love your fiction as well.
I'm trying to think of the name of it. I knew it was just going to go out of my head. Shoot.
If it comes back to you, feel free to pop in with it. All right. So next one is, what's your go-to source for gaining a different perspective or more information to inform your perspective?
First of all, it's asking people, right? First of all, well, really basic is knowing what your perspective is and how it might be, biased or whatever reality you're living in. So is to travel and do all of those things to like open yourself up. But then I think it's really important to belong to associations outside of construction or engineering, and see how people are approaching problems in different industries. And so being able to ask questions and then apply it back to what we do every day.
That's great. So if you could give one piece of advice to a younger self, what would it be?
Speak up more. And hey, I think differently than most people in construction, and I wish I would have just spoke up, because we talked about having different players on the team, and me not speaking up sometimes it cost other people time and myself time, and so just trust your gut and speak up.
Love it. What's one trend or innovation that you think is going to impact the future of construction?
Oh, wow. I just think it's so interesting. And, we're implementing Procore right now, and just seeing data analytics and being able to get all of that information in one place and the story that it's going to tell. And I think we have a lot of lessons that we're going to learn.
Great. All right. So if the construction industry had one tagline, what would it be?
One tagline for the construction industry. Build it so your kids can enjoy it.
Love it. Love it.
Well, with that, I think that's a nice way, especially with the topic we have today of investing in this next generation, a nice place to wrap up. So to those of you who are watching, if what we shared and what was shared here today resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with your networks. And we'll keep bringing to you stories of leaders who are reshaping our industry and harnessing the power of construction. Thank you so much.